Peace to all the positive people in the universe. How y'all doing? This is Shabazz with the proper perspective. How y'all doing out there? We're gonna get it started. Y'all know I'm gonna wait a couple minutes or at least a few seconds. Make sure all of the algorithm notification type situations is going down. Let me get myself a sip of water. Now, what's going on with y'all? How y'all doing out there tonight? Make sure when you come into the chat room, if you're coming to the chat room, hit the like button, subscribe to the channel. When you hit the notification bell, please hit the all for notifications so you actually get the notifications, because the personalized one don't send you nothing. Now, what we talking about tonight? We're gonna get it started. I shall open with my regular statement. Peace to all the positive people in the universe. What's good, Richmond, Virginia? Hotep to the Pan-African Black world. And everybody else to know that we need to put puzzle pieces together. And how do we do that? Look beyond the smoke and mirrors. So like I said, this is your brother Shabazz, sometimes Professor Shabazz. If you're tuning in, if you're gonna participate in the chat room, please hit the one button or just say what's up, peace, hotep, or anything else you want to say. What we talking about tonight? We are talking about a comedy sketch that has taken the Christian world by storm. Even got some ex-church folks and some church hurt survivors clutching their pearls. We talking about that brother named Druski, his viral Megachurch Pastors Love Money skit. Yeah, that's what we talk about tonight. But I hope that we are prepared to have a bit of a serious conversation. I'm not here to punch down. That's why I said punch up in the title. I'm not here to punch down on anybody's religion. Now, I know some people say that what Druski did is blasphemous. Some say it's disrespectful. And like I said, plenty of people are saying it's punching down on the church. But I will have you know, that's not the totality of the conversation. Others are saying, no, wait a minute. Others are saying this is actually good for the community. It's actually good for conversation. Some have even called it prophetic satire, because they say this is what the church has become in a lot of places. Now, I read that just in an actual news article in Dallas Weekly. So this ain't just me saying this. But the question is Druski just clowning people's faith? Or more particular, is he dragging a particular industry that has for a long time been unabashedly proud of wrapping itself inside the dress of Christianity so that it can get money, so that it can gain influence, so that it can attract celebrity? That's the question. Now, under that, we got another question. One a little bit more important. Do we have a history of speaking out against the church? Have people like probably the most famous, popularly known African-American Christian, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., is he an example? Do we have black religious leaders who have ever called out religious hypocrisy and or performative Christianity? Or has it always been the type of thing where critique of the church is automatically labeled disrespect? And does this conversation even happen in continental African context? Now, there's a question that I'm trying to entertain. Or not just African context, in other black populations and other black societies, be they in the Caribbean, be they in Europe, be they on the continent. And we specifically know, or I specifically know, mega churches are, no matter where they are, mega churches are flashy for the of it. The question is, are they naturally inherent and inclined and prone to be scandal plagued? So that's the question we're going to try to tackle tonight. I'm going to turn this music down a little bit. So like I said, let me quickly paint the picture for anybody who hasn't seen it. I don't think there isn't anybody who hasn't seen it, but I'm not going to necessarily play it because y'all know you get in trouble when you play people's skits or when you play people's videos. I'm trying to stay away from that zone again. But y'all know Druski, he plays this over-the-top megachurch pastor. Now, I don't know if you caught this, but the name of the church in his skit is Collect and Praise Ministries. Now, the name itself is a direct reflection of satire, which is what we're really talking about tonight. And he's in designer clothes. He's swinging above the congregation in a harness. It's like it's a concert. Smoke machines going on, and in the background, he's playing Kirk Franklin's Revolution. And at one point, he makes the same. Somebody in the congregation asks why I'm wearing Chris Dior and Chris Louboutins. And that's the punch of the joke, because I'm a Christian first. I ain't gonna repeat the whole thing. Y'all seen it. And even in another section, he tells people literally that they can't leave the building until they raise $4 million. So to me, okay, yes, it sounds like, it may feel like, that word feeling keeps coming up. It popped up in last night's show. It's popping up in tonight's show. I know it's going to pop up again because I got a show directly, specifically related to feelings. So the thing is, it may feel like it's an attack on Christianity, but we got to use our noggins. It's time to think a little bit about this. Because really, it's more about flashy pastor celebrity culture than it is the church in and of itself. There's plenty of churches that don't do this kind of thing. At least I think. At least that's what I'm told. It's really about prosperity gospel theatrics. It's really about manipulation of people's devotion and people's fear to secure, and people's fear, period, in order to secure huge sums of money. Now, I know some Christians online are saying he crossed the line. That's too much. He's mocking Jesus. He's mocking the church. Some have even said this is demonic. Now, that's when my spidey senses begin to tingle. I'm like, wait a minute. Y'all said it was demonic? You think it's demonic? I got problems. Now, truth be told, fair, firm, consistent, fair, and balanced, whatever those phrases are that the big corporate networks like to use. Because there are some more level-minded people, including Christians, proud Christians, practicing Christians, who are like, nah, wait a minute. He nailed it. This is exactly what I've seen in my own eyes, in my own churches. I've been there. I witnessed it. Now, I don't know why people would feel like they got this sudden amnesia, because we've seen this type of thing in real life. This was just a comedy sketch. But we have actually seen literally these things going on. But, okay, we're going to move into why I really wanted to talk about this. I'll give you a brief biographical sketch. Myself personally, I think one of the reasons I want to talk about this is because it is clearly an example of satire. I think it's an excellent example of satire. And satire is something that's a little like near and dear to my heart. Now, in the past, when I'll say it this way, like I said in my openings and my closings, it's Brother Shabazz, but it's sometimes Professor Shabazz. So when it was Professor Shabazz, when I was teaching, I had to teach on satire. Before I became a teacher, I had to study. When I was studying, I had to study satire. And so I'm all intellectually triggered when these types of things pop up. So I just want to put it on the record. Now let me see if I can put this on the screen. See if I can put this on the screen. What are we talking about? We're talking about satire. So I'll just throw this on the screen. So you can see satire is an artistic form that uses humor, irony, exaggeration to ridicule. This is the thing. Satire is not just to make fun of. Satire is to expose human vices. Satire is based on exposing social abuses. Satire is to provoke reflection and reform, not just to entertain. And that's why it's an important conversation. Because it's not just jokes for, what do they say, shits and giggles. It's not just jokes for hoo-hoo, ha-ha laughs. Satire is a genre and a technique that uses exaggeration, irony, sarcasm, and ridicule to highlight the flaws, follies, and abuses of individuals, institutions, or whole societies. Now, the funny thing to me is oftentimes when satirists, because that's what if you are a performing satirist, sometimes satirists have to make it up out of their own mind. Like, we live in a world where the satirist can just pluck things out of reality and say, oh, here we go. But the goal of satire is not just to make people laugh, it's to make them think. It is to expose harmful beliefs, harmful behaviors, and hopefully, ideally, ultimately, to inspire some kind of change or self-correction. And that's why satire is important. So whether it's Druski or Dave Chappelle or Richard Pryor or so on and so forth. Now, I'm going to veer off from the Druski conversation just for a hot second. Just to further establish the grounds. Now, if anybody has taken a literature course, then you might be, or not any literature course, but if you've been down the halls of literary analysis, you may have been treated to some satirical works. And so now with satire, there's always two layers. There's the surface joke. It is always a surface joke. That's how it plays. It's like the Trojan horse of comedy, because there's a surface joke. And then there's the underlying critique of real world conditions. And so what I want to do is talk about, so I'll give you an example. Classic example in the annals of satire is, and it's a white guy, it's a European, it's a European dude, but his name is Jonathan Swift. And he wrote this work, this text, way back in 1729. And it's called A Modest Proposal. A Modest Proposal. Key words. The words themselves begin to structure the satire. Now, in that work, Swift writes a calm, rational, economic planner who suggests that impoverished Irish families should sell their infants as food to the rich. And in that work, he describes recipes and projected profits with chilling detail. And this is all true. It's true that he wrote it. It's not true that it happened. It's a grotesque suggestion. It wasn't meant literally. It is an extreme exaggeration designed to expose how British policy and wealthy landowners already treat the Irish poor as commodities, revealing the dehumanizing cruelty of colonial rule and elite indifference. But that's the point. Critics note that the function of the essay's satire is to shock readers into recognizing injustice and to prompt readers to cure the problem under debate. It wasn't written to endorse horror. It wasn't written to scare people. It was written to say, look, you see you have a problem. You cannot afford to continue ignoring it and kicking the can down the road. Or perhaps this type of thing will actually occur. And I believe there was an African-American, I don't know if it was a teacher, scholar, or spokesperson. I do remember there was someone who got into trouble for modeling her comments off this same type of writing. And she said something along the lines of, the only way to bring about real justice is for every black person. I'm not even going to repeat it. I may put it in the comment section one day. But again, so this is what satire is supposed to do, is to make you think. Now, I got one more, and I can't help but to bring this up because it is extremely relevant. There's a brother by the name of George Schuyler. And in 1931, this is during the Harlem Renaissance, he wrote a book entitled Black No More. And if I can get that one on the screen. Let's see. If I can get this on the screen just for a hot second. There we go. Show that. So you can see it's scrolling down the bottom of the screen. George Schuyler's Black No More. George Schuyler's Black No More. Now, in this text, in this book, in this novel, Schuyler imagines a near future. It's written in 1931, but it's almost science fiction. It's written about the future. And in it, he writes about a United States where there's a scientific procedure that can turn a black person visibly white in a matter of days. And thus he's solving the country's color problem. It collapses the color line. Now, in the satire, it throws black institutions, it throws white supremacist organizations, it throws the whole racial order of this country into chaos. Now, through absurd situations and what they call biting caricature, he satirizes not only white racism and Jim Crow, but also crooked black leaders, crooked black organizations. Y'all I don't know if y'all see where I'm going. And crooked black movements that are shown as profiting from racial paranoia and the maintenance of the color line, we'll call it. The dividing line, we should say. Now, Schuyler uses exaggeration and mockery to critique both white supremacy and segments of black leadership. And because in his view, they exploited the struggle rather than resolving the problem. I think y'all see where I'm going. I'll give you an example. There's one example. I'll just read off one text, one quote, I should say. He says this. He says, the Negro problem, which had been the concern of America for 300 years, was finally solved by a process as simple as straightening the kinky hair of a pickaninny with a hot iron. Boom, is what we would say. That line captures the whole novel, takes the most profound, the most painful social issue of this country, and reduces it to a cheap beauty treatment. And suddenly the NAACP, Klansmen, politicians, they're all panicking because their whole hustle depended on black skin staying black. Now, in the realms of satire, it's pure satirical genius. But this ties, this tradition, this approach ties directly to Druski. Now, Druski, just like Swift, just like Jonathan Swift, just like George Schuyler, Druski uses outrageous, theoretically unreal scenarios, just as Swift used the cannibalizing of babies, just as Schuyler used a machine that erases blackness to expose very real social sins. Back then, it was colonial exploitation for Swift. class cruelty, racial capitalism, an institution for George Schuyler, and institutional hypocrisy for Druski. In each case, the satire's exaggeration makes visible what polite society tries to ignore. But why? Why does it make it visible? The explicit function is to force the viewer to confront uncomfortable truths so that conditions can change. Now, Druski's Megachurch skit works the same way. He exaggerates pastoral theatrics, or he puts them on full display. He's flying in on a harness, heavy smoke, designer brands, a pastor who refuses to let congregants leave until they raise millions. But Druski's point is to highlight real concerns about prosperity gospel culture, real concerns about religious celebrity, financial manipulation in some church spaces. I gotta say some church spaces just in cause. I want to emphasize some church spaces just in case. Now, the unreal spectacle swinging from the ceiling, the absurd fundraising demands, all of this points at real patterns. Pattern recognition. There's another buzzword for you. Pressure for extravagant giving. He literally says, thank you for your life savings. Okay, not literally. I'm paraphrasing. But he takes the person's life savings. Extravagant giving. Leaders living lavishly off the flock, and churches that feel more like concerts or music shows than spaces of spiritual care. Now, just as Swift's cannibalism proposal was never the point. The point was British cruelty. Schuyler's whitening machine was never the point. The point was the madness of racial hierarchies. Druski's cartoonish megachurch pastor is not the point. It is not an attack on sincere faith, Christian or otherwise. It is a satirical attack on the commodification and performance that have attached themselves to that faith in certain institutional forms. In all three cases, the satire's intent and effect are to hold a mirror up to society's contradictions so starkly that denial becomes harder. And conversations about reform become harder to avoid. Now, we had a bit of a conversation, I believe last night, about what people should be doing in the church. Joining the church and demanding more accountability. So, where do we go with that? Well, let's move into this idea of there are plenty of black critics, black scholars who deal with this, who've been trying to get everyone's attention about this. It isn't just Druski talking. There are black Christian scholars, there are pastors, there are critics who have been calling out megachurches for years. And they back the idea that satire like this serves a purpose. And there's scholarly work on black megachurches that document internal critiques of prosperity theology, excessive financial demands, and pastors pilfering church coffers for personal use, noting how these patterns erode trust and spiritual focus. Researchers highlight member pushback against extreme volunteerism and financial donations when leaders don't deliver, especially when leaders don't deliver promised benefits. And so I'll give you another example. Critics like those behind Honk for Jesus, a film satirizing megachurch scandals. This film exposes how celebrity pastors perfect their craft, how they perfect their craft into classed, gendered, sexualized configurations of religious power. They turn their pulpits into stages and religion into a product. Now, you even got some YouTube channels. There's one called Smart Christians, which to some people may seem like an oxymoron, but we ain't going there. But you even have other YouTube channels that have gone viral exposing the dark world of black pastors, calling out mismanagement of millions, luxury jets purchased with tithe money, and faith becoming a mask for greed, manipulation, and unchecked power. Pew Research notes prosperity gospel critiques in black megachurches, where wealth is preached as God's favor, especially in suburban models over inner city activist ones. So again, the people who are clutching their pearls have some things that they need to think about. And if you really, like I said, the crazy part, the funniest thing is, Druski is not entirely making this stuff up. We all saw, I think we all saw, a lot of us saw Bishop T.D. Jakes in what, the Potter's House, and what the heat that they face for their opulent lifestyles funded by the congregants. Plenty of people saw Creflo Dollar's World Changers Church infamously fundraised for $65 million to buy a private jet because God told him to ditch the commercial airline industry. And you got Paula White and others in prosperity circles have been called out for multi-million-dollar homes and jets while preaching seed faith giving. These are not hypotheticals. Druski's exaggeration actually lands because the reality is already absurd. So really, Druski's sketch is a call to action. Now, I'm not sure if people are going to pick up the phone. And like I said earlier, it's not just here in America. If you go to the continent of Africa, you got the same problem. You got the same critique. They got mega churches, just as massive, with just as many scandals. Some might even say some of the scandals over there make Druski's take on the Black American mega church look tame. You got Nigeria's, TB Joshua, the Synagogue Church of All Nations, built a multi-million-dollar empire with miracle healings. He got private jets, luxury compounds, but the BBC did an expose and revealed staged miracles, abuse, and over 100 deaths in a guest house collapse covered up as divine attack. So there is a problem in these religious circles and in these mega church circles. You got David Oyedepo's Living Faith Winners Chapel, 50,000 plus seat arena, multiple private jets. Prosperity preaching that demands tithes for blessings. Critics call it a religious racket, exploiting poverty. So it's kind of massive. So Druski was right to do a skit. The hope of satire, here's the trick, here's the catch. The hope of satire is to make people think long enough about it that they want to make a change. So prophets, you could call them prophets, you could call them journalists, you could call them ex-members of the church, you could call them comedians, you can call them satirists. But the idea is to roast, to satirize this neo-colonialism. Western prosperity gospel mixed with local shamanism in some places, preying on desperate poor folks. Scholars note that African critics mirror the Black American ones: excessive demands, personality cults, and funds vanishing into pastors' empires. I swear to y'all, this sound like another brother. Peace to Mr. K for joining in. Good evening, Mr. K. Peace to you. I'm telling you, this whole thing is a parallel to some other brothers in the community. While they may not use the church, they are certainly speaking a very similar language. Now, continental writers frame it as spiritual imperialism, where flashy churches distract from social justice, the same way MLK warned against. When the focus is on consumerism, the spirituality walks out the door. And so again, now to take this back to the title of the show tonight, punching down or punching up? Punching down or punching up? Let me see what's going on. Now, Mr. K says, I'm trying to this book, Black Churches and Local Politics, Clergy Influence, Organizational Partnerships, and Civic Empowerment by Drew Smith, recommended by the late Pan-African scholar Rodney W. Walters. Okay. Bro, you gonna have me stuck in the library again like I was back in my school days. But y'all saw that. I'll put that on the screen again. Anybody interested? This book, Black Churches and Local Politics, Clergy Influence, Organizational Partnerships, and Civic Empowerment by Drew Smith. There's a book recommendation for you. So let's take this punching down accusation seriously for a second. When we talk about comedy, and we talk about comedy punching down, what the phrase actually means, it means you're targeting people with less power, with no power, with less of a voice, with no protection. So you can't be punching down if you're punching at people with power, with voice, with protection, with prestige, with money, with influence. You can't punch down to people in an elite position. When you're punching down, you're reinforcing the pain of folks already being exploited or marginalized. It wasn't really that. It was punching at the people doing the exploiting. So the question is, who is Druski actually hitting? Who is he punching at? Is he hitting everyday believers, or is he hitting a very specific power structure inside, if you don't want to say the church at large, then inside the megachurch? Now look at how many churchgoers, look at how many ex-members, look at even how many clergy are saying, this is exactly what some megachurches do. There are even clergy coming out saying, calm down, family. Calm down, let the congregants chill, because mega churches do focus on entertainment, smoke, wire rigs, theatrics, constant pressure to give, while leaders live like celebrities. Now, I'm not too familiar with the Christian hip-hop scene, but I'm told that a brother by the name of Lecrae, and if I said his name wrong, I do apologize. Y'all do know I say names incorrectly a lot. If I'm not familiar with it, I just apologize. But there's a Christian hip-hop artist named Lecrae. And I guess because he is, he's a big deal in Christian hip-hop, people wanted to know, well, what do you think? And he said his reaction was not one of offense. He said he kind of recognized, well, yeah, I've seen wolves in the pulpits before myself. So he's co-signing that theatrics for attention and money it's kind of pretty much an accurate assessment. And that religious leaders manipulating God's name for gain, for financial gain, yeah, that's a pretty accurate assessment. So I think it important that, you know, at least in this world, a believing Christian of such high status, if that's what you would call it, is confirming that Druski's satire is not just made up for laughs. It's reflecting documented patterns. So the satire here is not Christianity is stupid. That's not what he's saying. Druski is not saying the gospel is a joke. Now you could surely have an argument that way if you want to get into a religious battle, but that's not what Druski is doing. The satire is when you turn the church into a show, into a brand, into a cash grab. Don't be surprised when people treat you like a clown or like a clown show. Now, in that sense, the skit is punching uppercut at religious entertainment or at the religious entertainment complex. You know, America's real big on complexes, prison industrial complex, rich religious entertainment complex that does actually have real power. They have power over people's money, their emotions, and in some cases, their individual sense of salvation. Now, there's a long Black tradition of using humor and parody to expose hypocrisy, especially in sacred spaces. We got barbershop jokes about pastors and their Cadillacs, jokes about church mothers side-eyeing the building fund that never seems to build anything. So it's not new. So clutch your pearls for what? You're just being reminded that something needs to change. Now, Druski is just doing a high budget version, an Instagram version. Mr. K says the prince of Pan-Africanism patterned his voice, patterned his whole cadence from Pastor Histrionics. Very interesting. So like I said, Druski is just doing a high budget version for this Instagram era that we live in. He's bringing a real life conversation to the front stage, to the world of social media. So again, when we talk about these Christian responses, or some of these Christian responses, here's where it gets even more interesting. Christians are not, thank goodness, the Christian community as a whole they're not a monolith. Just like we say, Black people as a whole, we're not a monolith. Almost none of our communities are a monolith. I can think of one that might be extremely monolithic. But some believers say that the skit is utterly shameful and that no comedian should act a fool in a church or make mockery of Jesus. But others like Lecrae and many other commenters say that this piece exposes blind spots in church culture and that if the space is really sacred, if the church is really sacred, then it should not shelter wolves in sheep's clothing. You have to, if you're gonna protect your brand, if you're gonna have a brand, even though you probably shouldn't have a brand in a religious sense, but if you're gonna have a brand, then you should protect it fiercely. And those type of antics should be called out fiercely. Now, you know, I like to do some little research and whatnot, but I scroll through some social media places. And one commenter on a particular Christian forum said, the only people really mad at are the pastors of these types of churches. Regular members already know what time it is. The Alphabet Squad are definitely a monolith, 100%. I just didn't want to say it, but thank you, Mr. K, for saying it. So there are even full YouTube reactions. Hey, this is one of them, but there are full YouTube reactions from actual black churchgoers. Now, I ain't one of those. And even black churchgoers who are doing YouTube reactions and saying, as a devoted Christian, the Druski skit on megachurches was not funny. It was hilarious and spot on. So even inside the faith community, there's a split. One side equates critique of church practice with disrespect of God. Now, perhaps we need to help them understand the differences. Perhaps we need to try to bring them along so they can understand nuance and so they can understand what real disrespect is versus what satire is. I don't know. I can't make that call. I'm not in that part of the community. The other side says, if this hurts, it's because it's true. And the truth is what needs to change. And the truth is, this needs to change. So think about that. But I want to push a little further, because I want to talk about MLK just a little bit. Because there's a claim floating around that MLK also had a skeptical eye toward over-exaggerated preachers and preaching. Now, I'm not necessarily mad at that statement. I will say this, though. Now, okay, we ain't got MLK doing comedy skits. But we do have MLK on record doing prophetic critique, religious hypocrisy, and shallow religiosity. Now, it may not be directed specifically at a black church or a black mega church. I'm not entirely sure that they were, in existence back then. But I'll give you one example. In letter from a Birmingham jail, he famously critiques the white moderate, kind of the same way Malcolm X critiqued the white liberal. And King includes the white clergy, who say they agree with his goals, but not his methods, who constantly tell black people to wait for a more convenient season. So he calls this type of framing, he calls it a shallow understanding. He says it's more frustrating than the direct Ku Klux Klan oriented, straight up, outright hatred. He said their lukewarm acceptance is worse than open rejection. Now, this is a direct call, a direct shot, if you will, in today's language. It's a direct call out of religious leaders who want respectability over justice. So I say this, and I only bring this up because, okay, yes, MLK is on record of critiquing the church, not necessarily the black church, but the church. And y'all all say y'all brothers in the spirit anyhow. So, left hand, right hand. King also argues that nonviolent direct action does not create tension, but exposes the tension already present, like opening a boil so it can be healed. This is directly related to what satire does. It exposes what is already there. So that, again, that logic fits. That's what satire is. It doesn't create corruption. It doesn't create disrespect. It pulls back the curtain so people can see what is already there, what's actually going on. Now, on the preaching side, scholars of black homiletics note that black preaching has a strong impulse for beauty, artful language. What was the word brother Mr. K said? Histrionics. rhythm, performance, but that this artistry is supposed to serve truth and justice, not ego, not manipulation. Studies of King's own rhetoric describe his style as adorned and aesthetically powerful, but rooted in deep theological and ethical commitments. In other words, the performance was never supposed to be an empty show. It was supposed to be a vehicle for liberation. So you could say King critiqued Christians. You could say King critiqued clergy who were complicit with that which is wrong, who were lukewarm or overly performative. And you can say, while he may not have touched the vein of satire, he certainly touched the vein of exposing hidden injustice and bringing it to light. And that parallels the goals, the purpose, the impact of satire and what satire does. It targets satire in this respect for Druski targets religious institutions. Satire itself can target anything. But Druski's satire targets religious institutions that betray their stated mission. Now, I'm going to go just a little bit further. Let me put this one. I really need to put this one on the screen. So let me get this one onto the screen. See how that... The section we are talking about. Tithe accountability. Tithe back. Or shut up. That's what I want to say. If we're going to talk about tithing, and I know this might get heated. If the church cannot tithe back into the community, what's the point? That's my position. Now, whether that, it's not going to matter, like I said. I'm not a churchgoer. But I would like to encourage people, if you happen to find my channel, thank you for tuning in. Hit the like button, share this video with anybody that might find it of interest or value. Like, share, and subscribe is the name of the game. That's what we always say. But I would like to encourage people who are churchgoers that you should start demanding that the church tithe back into the community. That's one way to address the satire that Druski delivered. Congregants need to start demanding economic reciprocity. And I would say that, yes, of course, it was clearly and specifically directed at Christianity. But if you are a Muslim and you find yourself at a mosque that is beginning to be overly flagrant, if you are a Jew and you're going to a synagogue that is beginning to dabble in prosperity, hell, I'd even say if you're an African spiritualist and your Elay or what have you is beginning to expose itself to the luxuries, then you might want to think about this. It's not right to extract 10% or more from working folks, from widows, from single parents, from youth, and then funnel it into jets and mansions and smoke machines and high wires, all while the community sees zero tangible blessings. So again, I would just encourage you to think about that. Now, I did some poking, like the brother last night said, you scared of using Google? Well, I used Google. And Google said, national surveys show megachurch attenders give significantly less than smaller churches, partly because they see low community ROI. 32% give nothing or token amounts when they feel no direct benefit. Interesting. Overall, only 27% of churchgoers tithe the full 10%, and giving to churches is declining as people redirect to causes with visible impact. So if y'all want to get y'all numbers up, y'all got to show more receipts. Now, Google said studies confirm scandals tank local giving by almost 2%, which don't necessarily sound like a lot, but it comes out to be about $10 million a year. And that's some change. And these church scandals push donors to non-church charities instead. Younger generations especially demand transparency and community service over blind tithing. Now, I'm getting all this from Google, since the brother said you don't use Google. Now, Google says when churches do reinvest, food banks, job programs, youth centers, debt relief giving rises 32% because trust rises. So real talk across traditions. Or real talk across Abrahamic traditions. Malachi 3 promises blessings for tithing, but Deuteronomy 14 ties it to caring for the people, strangers, orphans, widows in your community. So if you're in that circle, that text tells you tithing is for specific things. It's for strangers who need help. It's for orphans. Y'all know the strangers who need help would be tantamount to the people ICE are going after under this current Trump administration. Indeed, Mr. K says, the black church used to be our social services. Now it's a social circus. I remember having a conversation with a sister who said that I brought up this kind of conversation, this topic, and I was saying something along these lines, and I said, the church needs to figure out ways to give back. And I said I had heard, this is what I said back then. Back then I hadn't done the research, but I had heard that Jews, the synagogues, the way they're set up, Jews go to the synagogue and that's where they get their loans. And the Christian sister was like, we can't do that. That's against the Lord. Now, I ain't no Bible expert, but if Deuteronomy kind of tells you the tithing is for the strangers, the orphans, the widows in your community, I just don't see it. Now, I asked Google, is this just the Abrahamic? Is this just the biblical text? And Google said, or what was it? Google, Gemini, what have you? In Islam, zakat is mandatory economic justice, 2.5% wealth tax. It goes directly to the poor. No middleman, no jets. Even in Judaism itself, Masir, I may say that word wrong, 10% feeds the needy, supports communal welfare, not rabbi palaces. So again, and in African spirituality, libations, offerings, ancestor veneration always circle back to village upliftment, not individual empires. If your Babalawo show up in a Mercedes Benz, we might got a problem. So what I would say is, if you are affiliated, I would say demand receipts. X% of tithes to local food security. X% of tithes goes to housing. X% of tithes goes to education, small business grants. If there's no reciprocity, withhold your seed giving. Because faith without economic works for the flock is dead. That's a dead faith. Now again, I'm not a congregant. So plenty of people, if y'all find this video and find this channel, you'll be like, well, who you think you is? You ain't even a congregant. You ain't even a believer. Hey, I'll take that. I'll take that shot. I'm not. I'm just asking you to think critically. The same way Druski Skit asks you to think critically. Go deeper than the surface. If you believe the church is sacred, then fraudulent, manipulative, exploitive leadership is actually the real disrespect. So whether you expose that through satire or critical analysis, which I like to think I'm doing, it doesn't matter. The discomfort is real. The uncomfortableness may be real, but it is a part of real analysis and work to change for the better. That's true whether it comes from a sermon, a letter from a Birmingham jail, or a comedy sketch, or a YouTuber. Now, from this perspective, backed by Black scholars, African critics, Lecrae, the hip-hop Christian, centuries of satire, and economic, what do they call it? Bean counters, tithing stats. If you still want to say, I'm going to just disagree. Druski is not mocking God. Let me pause for a hot second. Mr. K says, you'll love this book. Africa, Destroyed by the Gods. How Religiosity Destroyed Africa by Femi Akomolafe. Oh yeah, I'm gonna have to get that one. That one really sounds like it's up my alley. So Druski is not mocking God. He's mocking the commercialization, the entertainmentization, and the greed that have wrapped themselves up into your God's name, that God's name. Whether we're talking about Atlanta or Lagos. And for many, that feels like, I'm sorry that for many that feels like punching down, because it's nothing further than the truth. It's the exact opposite. But for others, it's punching up at institutions that have access to people's wallets, people's emotions, and their afterlife, or their fears about their afterlife, because they believe in that afterlife. And I'm not here to criticize anybody that believes in it. If you believe it, you believe it. You got every right to believe however you so desire. But don't get manipulated because of your fear for your belief in the afterlife. So the conversation is actually bigger than Druski. It's really more about who is allowed to critique the church. You shouldn't have to be a member in order to critique. Is accountability only valid when it comes from the pulpit? Like, how many times have the man in the pulpit been caught on camera? Should comedians, can artists, everyday members, can African prophets and congregates withholding tithes, can they hold up a mirror? Do you have to have a lofty title in order to hold up a mirror? Truth is truth. Now let me ask you this. Why, in this Christian tradition, a tradition that produced such a historical icon as MLK, if you can claim MLK as part of your tradition, why is that tradition, why is any critique of that tradition immediately labeled disrespect? That's the question. That's the question I'll leave you with. And so, now what I would ask you to do, Drop your thoughts in the chat. Drop your thoughts on the video page. Drop your thoughts on the comment. Did you feel personally attacked by the skit? Or do you see that the skit is a necessary satire about a real problem? Remember, satire. Satire is not just a joke. Satire is lifting the veil to expose a problem that needs to be changed. So did you think that there needs to be an expose on a problem that needs to be changed and solved and fixed? Now, if you're watching from the continent and you feel like there is a thing similar with African megachurches, do you think do you think it's the same? Do you think it's different? But whoever you may be, will you demand your house of worship to tithe back to the community? Or I ain't got time for that. If you're a believer, what does honest accountability look like inside the church? So that comedians don't have to do all this exposing. That's my question. So again, this is what I'll leave you with. If you found this breakdown useful, hit the like button. Share this with somebody arguing about the skit in their group chat. Make sure you subscribe. And like I said, hit the notification bell and hit all. So you don't miss the next live. And as I always begin, I will always end with peace to all the positive people in the universe. What's good, Richmond, Virginia? Hotep to the Pan-African Black world, and everybody else that knows we got to put puzzle pieces together. And in order to do that, we look beyond the smoke and mirrors. I thank you for joining, showing up, watching, paying attention, and leaving comments. Shout out to Mr. K for jumping in. And with that, I'm going to bid you all peace.